All right, get this going here. All right. Well, welcome, PAX attendees, to the future of VR, gaming, medicine, psychology, and beyond. I am Dr. Ryan Kelly, co-founder of Geeks Like Us, a psychologist based in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I use VR in particular with my clients. I have an amazing set of panelists today, one of which who couldn't join us live, Sarah Ticho, but we will be having her come in through a pre-recorded session. And with me, I also have Dr. Walter Greenleaf and Dr. Jessica Stone. We'll start with you, Jessica, or Dr. Stone. If you could give us a brief introduction and tell us a bit of your background with VR.
Sure. My name is Dr. Jessica Stone. I'm a licensed psychologist in Colorado, and I have been talking about using digital tools, including virtual reality, for about 10 years now, writing about it, using it, and having great success with my clients in a mental health private practice setting. I'm also the co-founder of Virtual Sandtray app, and we have that for tablets and for virtual reality.
Awesome. And I'll be asking you a lot of questions about Virtual Sandtray, which I know I love that app, but you guys are always advancing. I have no idea what you've added. And Dr. Walter Greenleaf, a bit about you and your background in VR.
Well, I'm a behavioral neuroscientist, research scientist working at Stanford University at the Stanford Virtual Human Interaction Lab. I'm also a director of technology at the National Mental Health Innovation Center in Denver, Colorado. And I also work with a number of the early stage companies that are developing VR applications for medicine. My focus is medical applications of VR. And to your question, Ryan, about how long I've been doing this, it's been quite a while. I got involved in 1985, 1986 era in VR. I was actually part of the original discussion about what to call it before we had the phrase virtual reality.
Wow.
I voted against that term. I thought it was a little too glib, but I lost the argument.
What, if I can ask, what were you hoping it would be named?
I had something very complex. I'm a scientist, so I wanted to call it 3D, simulated 3D interactive environment or something like that. But the term did not stick, which is probably just
probably good, or it'd be the future of whatever acronym that would be. That's pretty cool. Now I don't think I recognized how long this had been out. I mean, it's older than I have lived. And I remember one of your videos where you were talking about that it was so heavy back in the day, you had to use a brick to balance the headset. And I was like, what? It's hard for me to even wrap my head around. I assume that was only in like laboratory settings that those were used.
Yeah, the technology was very expensive back in the early days. We had to use very, very expensive computers. Silicon Graphics were the ones that we used, and the head-mount displays were these big contraptions. Sometimes we'd have a chain holding them up to counterbalance them, or sometimes we'd have something in the back of the head to keep our heads from falling over. But we were able to do basic research and understand the power of the technology.
That's so cool. Yeah, I try to imagine. I like to think I would have the similar innovative insight to know where it could go, but I don't know. I think it's so cool that you guys had led it there.
Well, I don't think we knew where we were going, but we knew it was going to be useful and important. And
right.
So we were just, pioneering, trying to explore some of the pathways.
That's so awesome. Well, I know that I and pretty much everyone at PAX is very thankful. At PAX, and I'll play this video as I chat here. At PAX, I mean, so for those who have been, you of course have seen the presence of VR skyrocket. There used to be a few booths around that would have a few things, Richie's Plank experience type of stuff, things that almost seemed gimmicky. And it's like, okay, so VR is kind of a gimmicky novelty in gaming, but it'll never pick up. It's too expensive. And then as time has gone on, now you go to PAX, and there's a 3 to 5 hour line to play the newest 10-minute demo of a VR game. We had Talon Beesch as the event manager of Oculus, and he's always there. He couldn't join us today, but I think that speaks two things to me, and we'll chat a bit about it. One is how much people want VR and like VR and see it as something, at least with gaming, see it as something so extraordinary and innovative and futuristic. At the same time, it shows that as accessible as it is getting, it still isn't quite to where these gaming companies want it to be. You have that line that's 5 hours because a lot of people might not have the money. Only recently have we had decent with like the Oculus Quest that are somewhat affordable and don't require this pretty high performing computer. But you see these new titles. Valve, of course, came out with the new Index. The most powerful commercial one yet, doesn't have wireless, but we're at 130 degree panorama, 120 hertz refresh rate, same resolution as the HTC Vive Pro, and with their launch game of Half-Life Alyx, which you were just watching. With games, there's of course these first-person shooters and crowd favorites. We also have ones that we know can just help with meditation and state of flow. This is Beat Saber here, which has been known to show to give people into a state of flow. Hot Squat, there's VR exercise. A number of Twitch and YouTube stars have been using VR to show how they stay in shape. Talon Beesch is also one who does that, so you should check him out. We have 3D art that's been very big. Tilt Brush is perhaps the most popular sandbox for this. In here, obviously I'm a psychologist, so in my practice I'm using it to draw big brains for psychoeducation and for therapy. Sarah Ticho will be talking about her company, HatsumiVR, and how she has incorporated art into VR and ultimately to improve well-being. For art therapy here, Sarah is also kind of at the forefront of that pioneering, and a lot of us are using it. The next biggest foray is, this is the client's experience here. So down in the bottom right, as you can see what the client is seeing, is social. So this is a very simple social app called Rec Room. It's free, like VR chat. But in here, people can go in and have their avatars. I'm playing ball with a guy named Billy. Just making friends with him. You just hold their hand like a handshake, adds them to the friend registry. You bump fist, you'll join their game. It's very cool. It's like these very early steps of Ready Player One, which will actually, kind of when we're looking at the future, Oculus 7 is going to be very exciting because I know they're going to be talking a lot about Facebook Horizons, which is basically their entry level into the Oculus world. And for therapists like myself who don't have a big lab like Dr. Greenleaf, or have the ambition to make an app like Dr. Stone, we have third-party ones that are available that we can be using for like exposure therapy, like this flight one, like the speech one before, this plank experience, where as you can tell, we are mapping a 12-foot by 8-inch long board, plank to walk on, that then is mapped into the game and can be used to actually elicit a fight or flight response, and in real time be able to try to use skills to decrease those. Now, when we look at gaming alone, gaming has been the big focus. The reason it is it needs to be interesting and it needs to be marketable. So Oculus and Vive have had many discussions on, this has to be our focus. However, that is by no means the extent of VR. Of course, we have some VR healthcare experts with me today. It can be used for retail. It can be used for a number of, again, health and social, a number of these other avenues. But for now, it's been gaming, but it's exploring into these other areas. The projection in gaming alone is that in 2027, it's going to be a $92 billion industry for gaming alone. We've seen a massive spike during COVID of sales in headset wearers. And in addition, with funding, we are seeing more and more funding going to VR initiatives, which I'm so glad you all have been able to get your hands on some and do the amazing work that you are doing. If it is all right, what I'd love to do is, Sarah lives in Brighton, England, and I would love to share a brief 10-minute interview with her, and if that's all right, Dr. Stone and Greenleaf. Is that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Of course. Sarah's fantastic. Let's hear.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay.
I'm the founder of an organization. Sure. So hi, my name is Sarah Ticho. I'm the founder of an organization called Hatsumi, which means to see something for the first time. So we've kind of broadly expanded into almost a design studio that work at the intersection of virtual reality, arts, and healthcare. But predominantly we're developing a tool that looks at how we can adapt an existing form of art therapy known as body map storytelling into a virtual reality experience. Alongside that, I also work as a producer on a game called Explore Deep, which is a meditative VR game controlled by breathing that we developed in collaboration with the Games for Emotional and Mental Health Lab over at Radboud University in the Netherlands. And then in my spare time, I'm also the healthcare lead for Immerse UK, who are a sort of central network for supporting people working in immersive here in the UK.
That's amazing. Why that slogan? Why Hatsumi? What does that mean to you?
I ended up studying anthropology in Japan. I came across this word Hatsumi, and I just really liked how the words sounded, but also what it meant. This idea that there are certain words that perhaps we can't translate into our own languages, but that there's new information that comes into our spheres all the time. And with what we're doing, because it's really about visualizing invisible experiences of pain and mental health conditions, I kind of adapted the word, because me can also mean to see, and Hatsu means to do something for the first time. So that's where the idea came from.
That's incredible. Now, you had mentioned body map storytelling. How do you use art in VR?
So I guess I've had a real interest in the arts for a long time. I first started working in the NHS and then left that quite quickly and started to work in contemporary art. It was through my own experience of mental health that I became really frustrated with how we can communicate experiences to doctors and clinicians. And I had what was later described as a psychotic episode, but I remember having like this sort of first sit down with a psychologist and them just trying to prescribe me lithium like straight into our first meeting, and I was like, I kind of feel like I'm okay. Like, I know that this is a concerning situation, but I don't feel particularly listened to. And so I decided that I wanted to actually start doing my own projects and wanted to create a film or a short story about what that experience was actually like, and talk about like what had happened for me, rather than trying to fit this kind of, standard criteria of what boxes to tick. And so that's where I first came across like virtual reality, was just, seeing the different ways that it can be used from sort of 360 storytelling. And I've done projects like that before. I did one called Wonderland X, that was an adaptation of Alice in Wonderland, but looking at through the lens of mental health. So thinking about the white rabbit and where our anxiety comes from. But I think the real interest, from my interest of the arts in VR, and especially around exploring mental health, is that it can be interactive and participatory, and how we can have it as a sort of two-way conversation between people. And so this is where I became really interested in body map storytelling, of using this idea of 3D drawing in virtual reality for people to actually say, this is what it was like for me, and this is what it looked like and felt like, and how can we use these creations that people make as a sort of catalyst for a conversation that can ultimately help people perhaps feel better seen and heard, when sometimes language can be quite limiting.
That's amazing. And body map storytelling, if you were to give the elevator pitch of what it is, how would you describe it?
It's a really cool tool that's been around for some time, and it involves basically tracing around a person's body to create a life-size outline, and then you fill it in through this creative and reflective process. So you go through a mindfulness sort of onboarding experience to get you thinking about the connection between your brain and your body. And then you start to think, for example, like, what does my anxiety look like? Where do I feel it in my body? Do I feel this kind of sickness in my stomach? Do you get a tightness in your chest? Like, I always go really red, especially when I'm doing public speaking. And, how can you think about what colors and textures and words may be associated with that? Usually you just get a massive piece of paper and use whatever drawing materials that you have. Well, actually, like, my crappy drawing doesn't really convey how like difficult
Right.
and painful this is. And there is something really powerful about being able to float through space and paint with fire, and also just create an environment where you can just think about that experience and not be distracted by the world.
I love that. You're right. It's so powerful. And that's
And you can
something
make
that really
things
inspires you.
huge. Yeah,
Oh my
absolutely. Just being
gosh.
able to like have this like playground of imagination where you can pretty much make anything, and just sort of the detail that you can go into. But I think that like sense of awe as well, of just feeling empowered to create this whole sort of landscape of your mind, I think is, yeah, like when do we get opportunities like that in the rest of our lives?
That is so cool. You had mentioned deep a moment ago. I love the kind of quote that is at the forefront of your advertising for deep, at least on the website, of art meets science. And the app itself is gorgeous. The artwork is gorgeous. And we were talking a bit before this. I don't know if I personally view you as an artistic scientist or a scientific artist. You do both so well. And I think some people would say, well, those are polar opposites. Art is emotional expression through some sort of skill-based medium, and it's largely subjective, inherently subjective. And then science is the crux of critical thought, and it is defined in its objectivity. And so how could you possibly have both? And yet you've come here and seen that they can exist beautifully together. How would you, that naysayer who was like, yeah, those, you can't have both, how would you say absolutely you can?
I think for a long time, like, yeah, people definitely have seen it as two separate things. But I mean, first of all, from an engagement perspective, at the most sort of simple level, like when we're talking about things like understanding complex ideas, understanding like difficult ideas as well, then I think the arts is a fantastic tool for like translating knowledge and making it more appealing. In fact, the researcher that first introduced me to body mapping, she's called Professor Catherine Boydell. So she's based at the Black Dog Institute in Sydney. And she did this incredible piece of research about lived experience of psychosis in young people. And I could be a bit incorrect in the specifics of this, but basically she was like kind of disappointed that she'd done this fantastic research that could ultimately benefit the world, but no one's going to read an academic publication. And so she worked with a local dance company to translate her research into a dance piece that could make this information accessible. And I think it's about, you know, the arts is such a valuable tool for reducing stigma, starting the conversation. And I think that's why I'm quite enthusiastic about with Hatsumi and this VR adaptation, is that there's the opportunity for this to be used in clinical context, for patients to understand their own experience and communicate it to other people. But if they're willing to, like, how can we use this as a tool to engage the public and go like, listen, like 43% of the population live with chronic pain. Like, here is a visualization of what that's like and how it affects people every day. That's why I really fell in love with Deep, because I think it's a rare example of something that was actually an idea by an artist. Co-founder and director Owen Harris, so it's led by him and Nikki Smith. And he originally created the game as a way of sort of managing his own anxiety, and then he came across another artist, Smith, who's based in the Netherlands and is now our sort of artistic director. And so they started working on the game, and then it was just them meeting with Dr. Isabella Granick from the Games for Emotional and Mental Health Lab. And so that introduction was facilitated by a festival curator, and just saying like, there's something interesting here that we could measure and prod at. And that's how that collaboration started of working together. And it's been really interesting joining the team and just seeing how closely the art and science team work together. And yeah, I think that the arts has always been like our way of existing and continuing to, you know, make sense of the world. Think of all the films that have completely changed how we understand the world.
Absolutely.
Or have helped us get through difficult times.
Oh my gosh.
Same with the music as well. I think that, you know, the power of audio and immersive experiences in games should not be underestimated.
Oh, I agree 100%. And it's so cool to see teams like yours develop, where it's, you know, filled with musicians and artists and game designers and mental health professionals and consultants from a variety of fields, creating this wonderful project, especially for psychology, trying to understand these abstract concepts of what my experience with my father is. And it's like, well, let me give you a standardized explanation. It's like, no, that won't be a thing. Like, we know even projective measures are incredibly hard to do in a standardized way. And so why not create something where it's specifically designed to try to, as mental health professionals, understand what they're going through and get a somewhat quantifiable idea of what is your experience, what are you feeling. I think that's amazing what you're doing. If I could ask, when you are looking at art and VR, which very naturally has led you to a therapeutic world and well-being, if you are imagining where we're going to be in 15 years, where are we going?
I do hope that the medical world has a more holistic understanding of what health and well-being does mean. I think in the sort of industry that I operate in, I hope that there is more support for more interdisciplinary collaborations, being able to bring in the artists and the creatives, as well as the doctors and clinicians and the academics, and like really importantly the patients as well, actually making sure that we are, you know, co-designing these experiences and saying like, is this actually what you want? Like, what do you really need right now? I love the idea that, you know, perhaps in the future you could go to your doctor and say, hey, I'm having a really tough time. And they go, all right, well, there's like a variety of options available, but one of these things could be that we prescribe you a video game, that there's, you know, in your local library, then we have a whole like VR suite set up and you can try all these different games. But yeah, I think I'm really excited for a future that doesn't rely on pharmaceuticals, perhaps making things more personalized and participatory, thinking of how we can use these things as a form of preventative care.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here, and I hope to talk to you very soon.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. Sure.
Okay. Well, my only regret is that she couldn't be here, so that, because she is like the easiest person to talk to about VR. She's amazing. Mm-hmm. I have a few questions, but actually I want to start by asking, is there anything that really stuck out to you from what she was saying, or anything you wanted to comment on in particular?
You can go ahead, Walter.
Oh, well, sure. From my vantage point, one of the heart of what Sarah was saying is that the importance of a narrative story. And one of the problems we have in healthcare is that healthcare is difficult, healthcare is boring, and it's hard to be the hero in your own quest or journey and to really understand the whole experience. And it's also hard for the experts, the clinicians, the specialists to understand your story, understand your experience, and to also convey the guidance along the pathway. So the more we can develop tools to take the subjective experiences of the individual and make them more objective and give people the power to do that, the better work we'll be able to do. And also the more engaged people will be in their own healthcare. If it gives people need to have a feeling of agency, that they're part of communicating their story and it's being heard. So I really appreciate what Sarah's doing.
Absolutely.
I think two main things popped, well, a lot. I just wanted to, I wish she was here as well, because I just wanted to talk to her and have a chat. Yeah. But two main things that came up for me is that I think one of the things, at least in mental health, that frequently happens is that people are worried and nervous, I think, about the impact on their work and their clients and all of that. And for me, I think of it, I want to say the opposite. I'm not sure it's exactly the opposite, but I think of it in terms of the treatments and the methods and all of that we've been doing to date. Some of them have been fantastic, but a lot of times they're limited in some way. And the amazing thing about VR, one of the amazing things is that a lot of those limitations can be removed, because you can create an environment or create an experience or something that allows us to take away. For instance, you were talking about exposure therapy, you know, with Rich's Plank experience. And there's a clinician in Australia, Dr. Les Posen. I was on a panel with him a couple of years ago, and he was talking about how he used to, in the olden days, take his clients to an airport, put them in an airplane, go up in the airplane and do exposure therapy, like actually in an airplane. Well, not everybody can do that. There's a lot of limitations in that scenario for someone to really truly have the experience of that exposure therapy. Whereas in VR, you don't have to rent a plane and have a pilot and go up in the plane and do all those things. You can, I mean, you will have that in the VR program. I mean, you don't have to do that in your real day-to-day life. So that's one thing that popped in my head, is just how much virtual reality can really broaden the horizons of what's possible. And then the other piece is that cross-disciplinary piece. And I think it's so important that different fields, different disciplines come together, and we start to work together in really powerful ways to further our treatment in mental health and the medical world.
No, I think that's exactly right.
You know,
go ahead.
Well, and Jess, I was going to add to your comments, which I agree with completely. I think with exposure therapy, if we're just relying on someone's imagination, they don't want to think about uncomfortable experiences. And it's hard to evoke cravings if you're trying to work with people to manage their reactions to and practice resisting peer pressure. Mm-hmm. And the great thing about VR is we can have it be dynamic and adjustable. So we can have something that might be very fearful, such as walking out at the end of a plank. We can have that become something where it's easy the first few times you do it. And whereas if you're doing it in vivo, in real life, there's not an adjustable difficulty.
Exactly. You can titrate your treatment in ways that you wouldn't be able to do it in real life. Yep.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, I know in my personal experience, you know, when I make these fear ladders for systematic desensitization of it, I know you guys know this, slowly exposing people to a fear or phobia or anxiety they may have, starting with something manageable, working your way up. But I'd always have this gap, right? Like if I'm doing a 1 to 10 scale and you're like, all right, spiders. So 1, think about it. 2, picture of a spider, right? Like you go, and then there's that gap between like 6 and 10 where you're like, well, I guess I need to get it's this or a spider now, you know, like, and VR allows you a few more stages. You're like, oh, okay, sweet. You know, this is great. Yeah, it's absolutely incredible.
Now, and again, you can gamify it and make it interesting and a challenge and dynamic.
Yeah, that's a good point. Even to the gamification of therapy in a way. I think that's a very, very good point. You know, she had talked about the idea of trying to, and you had mentioned this a bit, Dr. Greenleaf, trying to allow people through art in VR to be able to give you a meaningful projection of their feeling, or to try to give a narrative, a 360 narrative that more accurately says, this is what I'm going through. That's a little more than circling bubbles on a sheet. And I think that alone, whether it can be standardized or not, that's amazing. I mean, that is so incredibly helpful. My question for you guys is, do you see that? Do you see it in labs or in the future being able to standardize certain things, whether it be through biomarkers with it, or, I mean, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the way of doing assessments will change completely from a very subjective experience right now to something that will allow the individual to show how they're feeling in much more dynamic and creative ways. But also, one of the, you know, it's really hard to measure a system statically, but with VR we can evoke different experiences. We can have something that might be relaxing. We might have something that's a little bit focused attention in order to complete a task. We might have something that's a little scary. We might have something that's evoking a social response. We might have puppies, but we can evoke different emotional states and perturb the system and see how people react. And we can measure eye gaze, head position, heart rate, respiratory rate, heart rate variability, and we can use some very powerful tools to look at the individual and come up with a predictive model of what therapeutic experience is going to work best for the individual, because we have this data about what works for them, how they react to a stimulus. So the ability to evoke a cognitive state or an emotional state in a reproducible way, it's just very a powerful thing. And it's something that we've been relying on imagination heretofore.
Right. Yeah.
And one of the other issues with imagination is that if I'm imagining something, even if I try to explain it to you, I might not be able to explain it to you in words in a powerful way that I'm actually experiencing it. Whereas in VR, and things like what Sarah was talking about with the body mapping work and all of that, you can actually create that so that the clinician can also see it and hear it and have the biomarkers and more to go by. And it's more of a complete package than tell me what you're imagining. Try to explain to me what you're seeing in your own mind. And that's amazing to have ways to get past those limitations.
Absolutely. Now, I'll tell you, from a private practitioner who uses as much VR as he can get his hands on, the extent of that I get is we use the Polar tent for the heart rate that does it through Bluetooth through the game and can affect some of the games like guided meditation VR. And we use the Muse, which is the brain waves that can actually affect some games. It's pretty cool, right? I don't know how accurate it is. It's at least pretty cool. If I can ask this specifically, you, Dr. Greenleaf, but Dr. Stone, please chime in. What is VR medicine? I mean, is this something that's a large part of it? Like, how would you simply define VR medicine?
Well, it's the clinical and wellness applications of medicine are emerging really, really fast because it's very powerful technology. So not just in psychiatry, psychology, behavioral medicine, but for surgical planning, for stroke rehabilitation, for helping with autism and Asperger's and attention deficit disorder and treating addictions. There's a whole spectrum of applications that are escaping from the research lab, escaping from the startup zone. And now the larger medical product companies, larger hospital networks, and people as individuals are using them for health and wellness applications. So it's moving along pretty fast. We're projecting a $5 billion industry within the next few years. And it's going to be really fantastic. Some of the greatest applications now are addressing, as Sarah was describing, addressing chronic pain and distraction from acute pain. So it's going to become its own. It's hard to say it's going to be its own sector because it's really going to be very horizontal across all sectors of health and wellness and medicine.
And if I were to ask specifically, thinking of future med students, and I sort of think of the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles that has the VR that I believe is now a required part of their training program. Is that correct? Am I remembering that correctly?
Well, in the pediatric emergency department, they don't let any of the residents even into that department until they've gone through skill training on how to handle a resuscitation emergency, for example. So it's starting to become a requirement as part of their training. That's
awesome. If we were to sort of maybe speculate a little bit, maybe this is an unfair question, but what med school will be like in 5 to 10 years in a way that might use VR, what might that look like for a med student going in? How is VR going to be a part of their training? Loosely speculating, of course.
Well, for one thing, some of the complex structures like the spinal tracts and the neuroanatomy is going to be a lot easier to see in a three-dimensional interactive manner. For another thing, we have virtual patients and virtual cadavers. So I think you'll be able to do learning at your own pace with your own style because the material will be dynamic and adjust, pick up where you left off. Also, I think the big part of learning anything in healthcare is learning how to be empathetic and how to have a good rapport with not just the patient, but with your team members. And the virtual reality allows us to have scenarios and rehearsals in a way, much like a flight simulator, where you can see what it's like to be the other team experiences like and what their challenges are. So it's going to change medical education and making it a little bit more of off-site learning, learn at your own pace, learn the psychomotor skills you might need if that's what you're doing, you're becoming a surgeon, or learn the interpersonal skills and practice those if you're learning to that part of the curriculum. So it's going to become a much more, I think, less book-oriented, less PowerPoint-oriented, and more of an experiential learning at your own pace type of system.
That's all so exciting. And what about for a patient, in particular, the ones that are most vulnerable, who are younger or have anxieties or have you? Within the next 5 years, what might be their experience be coming into a hospital that utilizes VR?
Well, just one example is the project we did at the Stanford Children's, where we tried to do stress reduction, stress inoculation by having people be able to do a walk through the hospital, starting in the parking lot, going to the waiting room and check room, but we green screened in other kids to serve as guides along the way. So the idea was to reduce the anticipatory anxiety by having people have an experience before the actual day of the surgery. And that served to help reduce the anxiety, not just of the patients, but also of their family members. A very powerful way of reducing anxiety.
You know, it's something. I really like that. You know, I think my wife's in medicine and my brother's in medicine, and I was a competitive athlete for years. So I've been in MRI machines and CAT scans, and they've seen it all. And you get desensitized to it a bit, but it's very scary. I mean, for people who are not in medicine or have loved ones around them who they're familiar with the stuff, you hear that big, you know, magnetic resonance sounds, and you've got these people that scare you and you have no idea what's coming. And it's sort of the am I going to get a shot at the pediatrician extrapolated by 10 to 20. So to see, you know, like Project Braveheart, and to see some of these third-party apps where you can buy, you know, we've got some of these, but where you can have it where here's the MRI experience and you can map in a table. Here's a CAT scan experience, you can map in a table. I mean, it's so remarkable, the relief I've seen it give people, both personally and watching you guys and seeing, you know, all the great work you do. That's fantastic. If I can ask you both a question, and then Dr. Stone, I want to chat a bit about virtual Sandtray, but there's a quote that I've heard many times, and I've heard both of you use it in some context, and it is, wherever the patient is, that is the point of care. As providers or academics, or just in general, VR healthcare experts, what does that mean when we have VR?
Well, it's an extension of telemedicine. It allows us to do more powerful things we can meet each other in VR. And now, right now, a lot of the multi-user virtual environments, you look like a robot, and the non-verbal communication isn't there yet. But soon we'll be able to have anonymous meetups, for example, where you show up, but you don't look like yourself if it's important to present, to show up anonymously because of confidentiality reasons. Perhaps you're in a small town and you don't want people to know that you're going to a virtual AA meeting.
Right.
It's just going to be it's going to give more powerful tools in the hands of the clinicians to reach out to underserved populations using technology as a way to do it in a more robust manner. Well, how about you, Jessica? Have you had a chance to use VR in a telemedicine manner at all?
I have, and actually in just about 2 weeks, I'm starting a group with somebody in another state for children ages 10 to 13 who have ADHD and some aggressive issues. And we're all going to meet in our VR headsets for group therapy. So yeah, it's really broadens those horizons. And the other thing that I popped into my head when you were talking, Ryan, is that the concept of meeting your clients where they are, all in terms of in this telehealth way that we're doing now, and then hopefully even beyond, but also in their interest areas and in their culture. And so we've talked a little bit about like the gamification, and Sarah talked a little bit about using games and video games as treatment and whatnot.